Hey there, it's Seth. I'm back again with another video on the subject of the inner critic. And as a reminder, I have both a 12-month and 12-week program on silencing your inner critic. So if you'd like to work with me directly, you can find information below this video, how to get in touch. Okay, so in the previous video, I emphasized the importance of the practice of intentional kindness. Because, of course, the inner critic is that voice in our head which is generally very unkind to us. And in order to silence the inner critic, we're going to have to develop a new habit. So if you didn't see that video, I encourage you to take a look. I go into much more depth. But I outlined a very simple idea around kindness, which is that it involves 3 steps. First, paying attention to yourself, because so often we're ignoring our needs. Second, setting the intention of kindness. In other words, asking the question, what is something I could do right now that would increase my sense of well-being? And third, taking generous action to do just that. And so it could be as simple as noticing that there's a bodily discomfort and shifting your position slightly so that you're more comfortable, right? It could involve, if your stomach is empty, you need to grab a snack. It could be something more than that, and it could be, more complicated in the given situation. But the thing that most of us fail to do is actually stop, pay attention, and ask that question. And when we do that, often there's something very simple we could do to be kind to ourselves and create a little bit of a better situation. So I want to introduce another practice which is similar to that, and it's in some senses an extension of that practice of intentional kindness. But it also is addressing another aspect of the inner critic. So the inner critic is unkind, but the inner critic is also, we could just say, a nuisance. It is that voice in your head that is speaking to you, and it's distracting you. It is taking you away from the present moment. Rather than being totally focused on the thing you're doing, you're hearing this nagging voice. It's telling you that you did this or that wrong, or you're this or that kind of a person, and it's like a fly buzzing around or something, right? You can't really be totally present to the thing that you want to do. So we also need an intentional practice of presence. And of course, the first step is still going to be the same. We have to have the idea of stopping and paying attention. This practice is a little bit more specific. It's a practice that helps you to make sure that you are truly connected to yourself, to your body, to the surrounding environment, to the here and the now. And later on, as you continue to work on confronting, deconstructing, eventually silencing your inner critic, you'll need presence to do that. You will need to be very, very aware of the impact of what is happening to you in the moment that the inner critic is interfering. So that's what this practice is going to lay the basis for. Now, it's also just kind of a centering, or if you prefer, a grounding practice, that whether or not the inner critic is bothering you right now is a very healthy and valuable practice to know and to incorporate. So let's just go through it. Basically, this is to stop and pay attention, but then to tune into 4 specific qualities of your experience. And these are qualities that are always there, but that we may not actually recognize. Quickly, I'm just going to go through them, and then we'll go back and kind of add in a little bit more detail. But you can try this. In this very moment, I'm going to ask you to pay attention to 4 things. You might first just sort of have a sense of what is your state of mind and body. And then what happens if you stop and you notice your breathing? Okay? You can feel your breath coming and going. You can feel the rhythm. And now notice the ground. In other words, the ground under your feet. And if you are sitting, include the chair underneath you. But notice how you are supported. So you feel that support and you feel your breath coming and going. Now notice the space all around you. The fact that you are in an environment. So where are you in relation to other things? What's just the feeling in the space around you? Noticing that you aren't just this isolated body, right? You're not in a vacuum. And then notice the other sounds that may be happening. I can hear sounds out my window behind me. In this moment, if you're watching this video, of course, you hear my voice. Okay, and then just notice how you feel. Now that took maybe a minute or two, but it was very basic. Breath, ground, space, and sound. When you're not present, you can easily begin to hold your breath or restrict your breath, or you can basically not feel the ground under you. Right now, if you were to sort of feel yourself as if you were lifting up away from the ground, like you're not using the ground for support, you'll probably notice that's a very different feeling in your body than if you really notice that support you're getting from the ground. There could be all kinds of things happening in the space around you. In fact, you could know intellectually that there is an environment there, right? But you're not really present to it. And sounds can be going on, but if they're purely background, as opposed to like catching a sound from here, catching a sound from there, really noticing the dynamic and changing nature of the soundscape, well, again, you're not fully present. But if you do sense the breath coming and going, if you do feel the support, if you notice where you are in the space and you hear the sounds coming, then things start to become a little more dynamic and alive, and you are aware that you are in relationship to the world, and it's a visceral thing. You can feel it, you can sense it, and you can tune into it. You can adjust to changes coming in the environment around you. You are much more present. So just repeating that on a regular basis will help you develop it as a habit. Now, you may already know that if you are, let's say, sitting in a cafe and enjoying yourself, but then somebody walks in who you have this whole history with, and they walk right up towards you, and you can feel your whole body changes, right? Like, oh, it's this person. Oh, this is not what I wanted right now. This is not what's happening, right? Something's happening in the body, and something might happen to your breath. Something might happen to your relationship to the sense of the ground, the space around you, and your hearing attention may be somehow distorted. Now, I just used that as a quick example, but the inner critic inside your head can function just like that person who maybe you have some kind of conflicting relationship with. You have a conflict with that voice in your head. And when it says particular things to you, those things can actually instantly change your breathing, your relationship to the ground, surrounding space, and your hearing attention, your relationship to sound. In future videos, we'll talk about those things a little bit more specifically. But what I'd like to do now is just to go through these 4 elements one more time and just invite you to feel a very basic difference, a sort of a positive versus a negative. Because the first thing we need to notice is just that moment of change. The inner critic chimes in with its commentary, and this happens. to my breath or to the ground or whatnot. So just come back to your breath again, right? And notice how it's coming and going and really let it flow, right? Just be present enough that you can sort of enjoy the breath and notice your overall feeling right now. And then what happens if you just start to restrict your breathing somewhat? You don't necessarily have to hold your breath, but make it so that the breath doesn't flow, right? Now, we do this unconsciously. You might ask, why would I want to do this? But that's the point. We do this without noticing it. So let your breath flow again. Feel that, probably a lot nicer. But then imagine that there's some sort of criticism that's coming, or you just say, oh, damn it, I screwed up, right? What happens to the breath with that thought? Does it shorten? Do you feel tightness somewhere in the chest or in the throat, in the belly, somewhere that restricts your ability to breathe? Okay, so let's consider the sense of ground. Now, something important here is to understand that ground is sort of, you could say, it continues internally through the support of your skeleton, right? Your uprightness in your posture depends on your relationship to the ground. So let's contrast two different relationships to the ground. The first one, we will just call it being upright. So if you imagine that your head was like a balloon that was floating upwards without being rigid, just allowing your head to come to the highest place, and it's as if you're lifting up away from the ground. And just feel how that is. Now imagine your head is heavy and it sort of droops. You could imagine that you're sinking into the ground, right? It could be very subtle, but you notice you're heavier here, right? If you wanted to walk from here, it would be more work than that place where you're more upright. There's a sense of dignity. Well, once again, when another person or when the internal voice of the inner critic attacks us, often what we do is we kind of collapse, right? We want to notice that. We want to be able to catch that. So again, upright versus collapsed. Two different relationships with the ground. The surrounding space. How am I relating to the surrounding space? Now, something interesting here is to compare how does the space feel on the right and how does the space feel on the left? Because often we have a sense that the space is more welcoming in one direction versus the other. Now, sometimes this relates to the physical environment, like there's open space over here and maybe not right next to me on this side, and so it makes a lot more sense to think that I'm going to want to move out to the side where there's open space. But if you just sort of listen to your body, you might feel that the body is more kind of inclined to move in one direction versus the other. And if you really pay attention, you might feel it's like I'm attracted, like I'm expanding towards the space over here, but I'm pulling back from the space on the other side. So again, a sense of expanding, like the space welcomes me and I'm willing to expand outwards, versus I'm pulling in, I'm contracting away from the space. And these are basic kind of, relationships of I feel safe or I don't feel safe. And again, that sense of safety can change in an instant because of a thought or because of something someone says that makes me wonder, am I okay here or not, right? And then I do something in my body, but I could also experience that the space itself just feels less welcoming. It feels more like I'm constricted or I'm somehow boxed in by the space. Okay, and what are two different ways of relating to the sound? I think the best way to think about this is basically, am I connected to that sound or not? Is that sound kind of like it has almost a sense of music to it and I can catch the rhythm? Or is it just like noise back there and I'm trying to think here in my head, or I'm trying to talk to the person and there's sound happening out there, and it's like it's like a conflict between my attention here and the other sound out there. But it can be that I'm in a place that's very loud and there's a lot of noise, but I just sort of take it all in, and like, again, it's almost like I can dance with the music of the surrounding environment, the vibrations. They just, I'm not surprised by them. I know how to respond to them, adjust for them, right? So we'll come back in another video in the future to work with these things in even finer degree. But if you just begin checking in with these 4 elements: breath, ground, space, and sound, and start to notice when the breath is restricted, or when it feels like I'm sinking into the ground, or I'm pulling away from the space, or I'm kind of relating to the sounds around me as if it's a bunch of noise that I just want it to go away. Well, in that moment, I can use my awareness and my experience that actually it's nicer to have a breath that flows. It's nicer to have a sense of lifting up and away from the ground. It's nicer when I can expand outwards into the space. It's nicer when the sounds and my body, my movement, my sounds are in a relationship that I'm conscious of. And I can start to make little adjustments in that way so that I can be in a more dynamic state, a state of presence. And if I learn how to do that, this is going to be a resource when the inner critic comes along, makes its commentary. And in the sense of the practice of kindness that I introduced earlier, any one of these elements that I become aware of, maybe adjusting my posture, allows me to find more uprightness, or a nicer breath, or a better relationship to space or sound. Now, what I've just explained about working with each of these 4 elements is quite basic. In fact, the breath can be a very deep study. Same thing for how we relate to the ground, to space, and to sound. One more way you could think of these 4 elements, and in terms of what are the qualities you're looking for, is a sense of peace, and that being related to the breath. How do you breathe when you're peaceful? And then if you're not feeling so peaceful, what is the breath like then? A sense of dignity, right? That uprightness that we talked about in relation to the ground could be connected to a sense of dignity. A sense of collapse is maybe when I've been belittled somehow, right? So orienting towards your dignity, orienting to having a feeling of safety or perhaps confidence when your relationship to the space is such that you can move out into the space. Just asking myself, do I have a sense of confidence right now? But then relating that to space. And then in terms of the sound and the vibrations and the movement of the environment and how it relates to me, again, do I feel connected or do I feel disconnected? So that's, again, those same elements of breath, ground, space, and sound, but kind of bringing them to life in terms of certain qualities that we might feel that we have when we're present and that we might not have when we are distracted by the inner critic. If you are, in fact, determined to silence your inner critic, going beyond these basics will eventually be very valuable to you. However, this is plenty to get you started. Just to basically practice presence and have a fairly simple framework for coming back to presence when you notice that you've gone astray which again will often happen when you are battling with your inner critic. So if you pair this practice with the basic practice of intentional kindness outlined in the previous video, you have a really strong foundation for going on to do more specific work with recognizing how you are relating to the inner critic and beginning to deconstruct what's happening there and build new habits. So once again, if you would like my direct support with this issue of silencing the inner critic, there is a 12-month and a 12-week program that I can offer you. And when we get together on a call, we will talk about the 3 key ways that you encounter your inner critic and how we can approach those and which of these programs is right for you. So get in touch if you'd like my help with that. Thanks so much for watching the video. More to come. See you next time.